I do have a few questions, and this is sort of a general question, but this is one we get very often. How can I get my husband in a clinical trial that would be best for him? So can you just highlight for us what are some of the things a caregiver and patient should consider in terms of looking for a clinical trial in bladder cancer that might be the best for a patient at any stage? Like, what are some things they should be thinking about?
Well, I think first of all, it's very important to have a physician that is actively involved research and, of course, taking care of patients, but also very involved in willing to move treatments forward. Really, these physicians are mainly in big institutions, but we also have a lot of physicians training in big institutions like MD Anderson that later on they go work for smaller institutions or private practice and so forth. And it's very important to get in touch with one of these physicians that are highly invested in willing to move the treatment for bladder cancer on and to kill this disease. So number one, getting your physician, good one, it's very important. And then in terms of being very open with the physician and discuss with him what you expect from your participation in a clinical trial and what are the standard of care options that you have nowadays in the market, and compare that to the clinical trial options and see which one is better for you and which one fits better your needs.
Great, thank you.
You can always go on the web and search for, nowadays with internet access, a lot of people go in and Google everything. As a word of caution, I like to tell my patients also, be careful where you go to. You have to trust those sites that you go to, the source. You have to go to sources that are truthful and that do not give patients false information and misguide patients in that sense. So one of the websites is, of course, BCAN. It's your site. There are other sources out there. There is another website that is called clinicaltrials.gov. That is very important to have handy. Patients can enter by the disease, by bladder. You just put bladder and you just do a search and it populates all the bladder studies that are available right now. It not only mentions phase 1 or 2, it mentions all the bladder cancers, so you will have to be a little bit more specific of the stage of your disease in order to pull up specific protocols that you might be benefiting from. And that is when your research team, your physician, your nurse will come in very handy to help you navigate through that website and finding out which options you have.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, the clinicaltrials.gov is another good resource, and we very often will check that as we begin to add trials to the Beacon clinical trial dashboard as well. So here's another question. Because some patients are being seen in their community and perhaps their physician is not involved directly in a clinical trial. So how do you suggest, because you've spoken to many patients, how do you suggest they bring it up to their community-based doc who might not be part of a clinical trial and might say, well, you don't need a clinical trial? How do they bring it up if they really are interested in pursuing being part of a clinical trial?
Yeah, a lot of patients do not realize, and of course it depends on their insurance, that they can refer themselves to bigger institutions without the need to go through a local physician. And you will be surprised to know how many people does not know that information. That's number one. And number two is getting all the facts and going to that local physician very informed, pull up all the information that you have in hand and just lay down your terms and tell them that you would like a second opinion. You are not double guessing or you are not putting his reputation in line. It's just that you will like another opinion, and that is a very honest conversation that you have to have with him, and most of them would not have a problem with that.
Great. All right, here's another question. If a patient participated in one trial, can they never take part in another trial for the same disease, or is that something that they could do?
Well, it definitely depends on the eligibility criteria for that second trial that that patient is willing to move on. It's, in general terms, that is not completely accurate. It just depends on the specific eligibility criteria that particular patient is willing to move on. I can tell, though, that there are some clinical trials for newly diagnosed patients that will not allow patients to have had any other treatments for cancer at all, period. Or if they've had a history of another treatment, like, for example, a bladder cancer patient who a couple of years ago had a leukemia or a myeloma or something and received chemo for that, that patient might not be eligible to participate on another clinical trial just because there is a lot of contributor factors that could impact the results of the clinical trial if we put a person with a second malignancy on the study. And if something happens to that person, we don't know if it's because of this current malignancy or it's a recurrence of the previous one or a complication of the previous treatment.
That makes really good sense because, again, remembering what you said earlier, that they're really trying to determine if the new treatment being studied is better than the old treatment. And I think a lot of people need to remember that many of the treatments or most of the treatments that we have today wouldn't be approved by the Food and Drug Administration if there weren't clinical trials out there. So that's really important. I have another question. What percentage of people might go through to the place of getting to informed consent and then decide that they don't want to participate in a trial? And what might some of the reasons be for somebody to go that far and then decide not to do it? Do you have any stories maybe you could share of some patients that you might have seen that have done something like that?
You mean as far as patients signing the informed consent and then wanting to drop out?
Right, or even getting to that place where they're asking and being, considered for a trial and they say, no, maybe I'm not going to do it. Like, what percentage get that far and don't do the actual trial?
I don't know that I can put a percentage on it, but it's very, very, very minimal. Very small number of patients actually get to that part and find out, yes, they're eligible. Yes, the doctor thinks it's a good idea for them to participate. Yes, they would benefit from it. The potential benefits outweigh the risks, and they're ready to go forward and then suddenly decide, no, I don't want to do this. And we do have a few patients that do that. And some of the possible reasons would be, I went home and had a chance to discuss with my family members or with my spouse. I don't think that I can make these extra additional trips. Do you know for sure? I called my insurance and they're not willing to cover these expenses, or the travel becomes a burden, stuff like that.
Great. Those are really important reasons. And can you talk a little bit, I know that you have a wide array of trials going on at MD Anderson, but maybe talk a little bit about some of the trials. We're going to talk specifically about non-muscle invasive, muscle invasive, and advanced bladder cancer clinical trials in future webinars, and I'll share that information in just a moment. But are there any trials going on that you know about that really focus on quality of life issues more so than actual medical treatment, but anything that you know of that's really focused on that?
Well, we have a study that is focused on quality of life of patients after a cystectomy, not really before surgery. We don't have any quality of life protocol in patients with non-muscle invasive bladder cancer right now. This protocol that I'm talking about is a multi-center effort led by Dr. Shah here at MD Anderson. And it's looking at coming up with parameters that patients complain, or let's put it that way, complications after the surgery. And we are trying to enroll like in between 10,000 and 20,000 patients to come up with a list of quality of life issues after cystectomy so we can improve upon.
So really it's more than just looking at specific treatments. Of course, that's going to improve quality of life, but how can we take a look at some of the things that we're doing in care to improve overall patients' quality of life? So there's a lot of reasons, I guess, to be part of a clinical trial.
Yeah, and it's not until we put all of these people together, all the data together, that we know what's going on and what things we can do to improve. Because if we see isolated cases here and there, it's not enough information to tell us that there is a problem. So it's very important to come together and put as many patients as possible in this trial to find out how we treat patients after cystectomy now and how we can improve upon in the future.
Great. Well, this has been a terrific program. Thank you so much. I want to talk a little bit right now about our upcoming webinars. We'll be highlighting bladder cancer clinical trials for non-muscle invasive bladder cancer on Tuesday, May 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have Dr. Robert Svatek from the University of Texas Health Center in San Antonio and Dr. Yair Lotan from University of Texas Southwest Medical Center talking about what's going on in non-muscle invasive clinical trials. And then on Wednesday, May 18th at 8 p.m., we're doing the highlights of bladder cancer clinical trials for muscle invasive bladder cancer. And we will have Dr. Seth Lerner from Baylor College of Medicine and James McKiernan from Columbia University Medical Center that are both experts that are doing a lot of clinical trials themselves, talking about what's going on in muscle invasive clinical trials. And then on Wednesday, May 25th from 3 to 4 p.m., we have Betsy Plimick and Andrea Apollo. Betsy is from the Fox Chase Cancer Center, and Andrea Apollo is from the National Cancer Institute, talking about advanced or metastatic bladder cancer clinical trials and what you should know. Our Patient Insight webinars are sponsored by Merck and Genentech, and we thank them for their support of these important programs.